Hello, I'm David Rothenberg, hosting this podcast, the Reentry Reality Check of the Fortune Society, a nonprofit organization which advocates for the formerly incarcerated and for men and women still in prison. We also provide multiple services for the thousands who walk through our doors each year. Thank you for joining us.
Hold my head high as I travel along this road. Help me always to speak.
One of the aspects of prison folklore is the jailhouse lawyer, men and women who, while they're doing time, helping other people who are incarcerated with their legal issues. But there's another subculture, a very small subculture, and that is people who, men and women who are attorneys who, they're practicing lawyers who end up in prison. And two such people are now staffed at the Fortune Society and our guests, Michele Weinstat and Jeffrey Wertkin. And I'm curious about two aspects. When you were doing time, where you were doing time, and when you were doing time, is your legal background surfaced, but became a factor, and then of course coming out and that journey. So let's begin with Michele. That you did time in New York. Tell us where you did time and where you were practicing before you went to jail.
Thanks, David. Good morning. Thanks for having me. I was on Rikers Island for about a month the first time I was arrested. I was arrested for A1 felony weight of cocaine and weapons charges on my first arrest. And
you were a lawyer at the time.
I was a lawyer. I had been a corporate litigator with a large law firm in New York City. And I had retired from practice after a mere 2 years with the idea that I would do much better selling drugs than practicing law, because I was in the grips of an addiction that told me things that were obviously errant nonsense. And so when I was arrested and faced 15 to life in prison on my first arrest. And so I spent some time on Rikers, and then got out on bail, and then was remanded again with another couple of indictments. And so I spent a few months on Rikers after that until I was able to get out on what they call a 2020 motion in New York, which is that they didn't bring the case to trial quickly enough. And so I got out and was out for the rest of the time. So I did Rikers Island.
Did you share with other people, with the other women, that you had been a lawyer? And was your experience as an attorney something that they wanted to draw from?
Well,
I wish I had. In other words, did you become a jailhouse lawyer?
Yeah, well, I wish I had a lovely story like that. But honestly, I was in the midst of a lot of trauma and was more concerned about detoxing off of drugs and actually had imposter syndrome even as a jailhouse lawyer, that I had been doing corporate work and didn't know that much about criminal. I was basically a hot mess in jail, and so while I would help people to some extent, it never got settled down to that point where I was doing a set amount of time. I was always in detention, and I was always going back and forth to court. And honestly, I don't think I was a great service to the other people that were incarcerated.
So you really weren't a jailhouse lawyer in your jail experience. Where did you go to law school?
I went to NYU.
Uh-huh. All right, Jeffrey, when you went to jail, where did you go to law school?
I went to Georgetown Law School. I grew up in the New York suburbs, and I went to Georgetown Law School, and I decided I liked Washington, D.C., and I stayed. I did about 10 years of corporate law. Then I worked at the Justice Department for 6, doing civil litigation, doing enforcement work under the False Claims Act, which is like a civil statute. And then I went back into private practice. And it was at that time that I got arrested, and I was sentenced to 30 months in the federal system. So
what year?
This was 2017.
And when you went in, while you did jail time and then prison federal time?
Yeah, so I was actually I was released on bail, and so my first time that I stepped through prison gates was when I self-surrendered at the beginning of my 30-month sentence.
In a federal.
Yeah, I was in a prison camp down in Talladega, Alabama.
Did other people know? The other guys know that you had been a lawyer?
Yeah, I have a little bit of a different experience than Michele. I did say that's what I did. There was it was Talladega, Alabama, so there was a lot of people getting pulled from the Atlanta area, and so there were white collar business people, and I shared that I was a lawyer. What was really interesting about my time there is the First Step Act got passed while I was there. I had been there just a few months.
Tell us what the First Step Act.
The First Step Act was an act that was signed in the first Trump administration that changed some of the drug sentencing laws so that you could go back and get your time automatically reduced based on what your sentence was. So if you were sentenced for crack cocaine and it was sentenced at a certain level because it was above regular cocaine, they changed the law so that it reverted so that the penalties were even or closer for cocaine and crack cocaine, and that meant instantaneously all these people were now eligible for immediate release. And so...
Did they understand the legal aspects of it, or that's when you came in?
Well, so what happened was, this is not just in Alabama, this was everywhere in the entire country, and public defenders were overwhelmed because now literally thousands of people were all, ready to do it. But the problem is that it needed to be adjudicated by a judge. So all these people, folks who are in prison, they know exactly what their time is. They understand the sentencing guidelines better than lawyers do who are even out there.
Do they know the law? Either did you find that other people knew the law, and did you meet people who were, quote, not jailhouse lawyers but not lawyers when something like the First Act came out? Did you consult with them or talk with them, or did they come to you for clarity?
There were people who understood their sentencing guidelines, and they understood how sentences were tabulated and everything like that. But in terms of the process and how you go about presenting a motion, I don't think there was a lot of information about that. There was one guy who was a jailhouse lawyer. He had been a bail bondsman. And, in prison, there's a whole economy, right? So it's like, if you help me, they would give the bail bondsman, money or in this, commissary or whatever, and then that person would help them write motions. Well, I stepped in and I said, you know what? I'm going to help people for free, right? I'm not going to.
So let me ask you, when you said that you're going to do it for free, were the other guys getting what, cigarettes? And
no, so there's no smoking when I was in prison.
How are they? How are they getting paid?
So you'd go to commissary and you could buy food and snacks and coffee.
And that became the wampum.
Yeah, so like mackerel, like fish, was like each packet of fish was like $1, and that was sort of the currency. 5 max, 10 max. It's like the fish, mackerel, tins of mackerel.
Michele, he's talking about a male prison. Is the gender difference that vast, or do you identify with what Jeffrey was saying?
Well, I mean,
in terms of the legal aspects, are the women as informed?
I think that people are much more in crisis in a place like Rikers Island than they are once they're already sentenced and they're in a prison, and so I just think that there was a lot more drama and a lot more people that were there for fairly petty things. Like when I was there were a lot of prostitutes, a lot of shoplifters and that sort of thing. So it was a kind of just chaos that is a little bit different from what I understand that going to prisoners. But there were a few women there that were facing a lot of time, and I ultimately was able to bond with them to some extent.
But was there a clarity? As Jeffrey was explaining, he said everybody seemed to know what their sentencing was.
I don't think people...
Was it a gender factor, or the fact that it was jail and not prison that they were less
I am sure it was just the fact that it was jail. I would imagine that the women are just as knowledgeable in the women's prisons as they are in men's prisons.
Well, back in not that you were that long ago, but there were less women that were attorneys when you started out. Now there are so many women.
I'm not that old, Dave.
No, but it is.
I'm sorry.
It is changing as it goes.
No, but there were like about half of the people were women, I think, when I
Remember, Ruth Bader once told us that, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that when she went to law school, a law professor said to her, "You're taking up space that a man could be."
Yes,
and that wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I hate to date you, David.
But now about 50% of the law students are women.
Yeah, and same when I went to law school. But I certainly, well, I didn't run into that many women who had white collar crimes, but I think also that's a difference between federal prison and
a county jail.
Yeah, especially a New York City jail. So, I think that there were so many differences that it was kind of apples and oranges, but certainly, women were trying to find out what their cases were about and how they could fight them.
Were the legal services good? Were most of the women with legal aid, and did you feel that women were getting the appropriate kind of legal counseling? Did you?
I had a private attorney, and I think that meant that I got much better legal help than people who didn't. I never paid him. I have to say, full disclosure, that the poor guy never got paid. But because I was,
if he's around, he may find us. Did women talk about their, in the chatter and the mess hall, about their legal situation?
Women did sometimes talk about it, but I obviously, when you haven't yet been convicted of a crime, people, if they're smart, they're careful about what they say to other people, because everybody might be looking for a deal. So and it seemed to me that, I was always told that you can't believe anything people say in jail. So, whatever they said, sort of, some of them, I believed, but,
So you never got off the rock doing time?
No.
So this is a very interesting dichotomy because many people, probably more people do jail time than do prison time, and they have, their legal needs are very different. You, Jeffrey, when you're convicted, everybody's looking for appeals or law changes, which is very different from people in a county jail who are.
And they lined up outside his room trying to get him to write motions.
Well, so that's what happened is that people were reaching out to their public defenders and not getting responses because these public defenders were overwhelmed. And somebody that I knew said, who knew I was a lawyer, and said, "Look, can you just help me put this together?" And I'm like, so I bought a typewriter ribbon at the commissary and sat down with him. And,
A typewriter?
Yeah, because there's no computers that you can use. So
I know, but they're were
typewriters.
Oh, you had typewriters.
Yeah, this is 2018. And so I bought a typewriter ribbon. And, people don't, at least, where I'm at, you don't really share a lot about yourself. You kind of tight-lipped. And I also was sort of an outsider. I was from the Northeast. I was educated. I was white. This was a majority black prison in Alabama. And, this was an opportunity where people would come to me and they had to share what happened with them. They had to share their pre-sentence report because in order to write a proper motion, you had to say this is what's happened before and this is where we are and this is what the sentencing guidelines says and this is how the law change affects it. And so I helped this gentleman, and I said I insisted on not taking any payment, no tinned fish or anything like that. And then just amazingly, like a week later, after he sent it in, he went home. Well, then everybody found out that I was doing this for free.
When you were talking about the difference, the cultural, racial, and all of that, were they less forthcoming about their situation, or did you have to counsel them to get trust? And
well, I would sit down. I said, look, you still have to meet the guideline, and we have to put down on the paper, there's 5 factors, and we just got to meet the factors. So you can tell me about it, or if you have your pre-sentence report, which is something that's in the federal system, and they say actually when you arrive, don't show anybody your pre-sentence report because it'll say if you cooperated, and that's another thing that you may not want to get out when you're in prison. And so But people would share that with me because we sort of needed that information to help write the proper motion. And so people would share, and that just led to further connections. I'm sitting and I'm like, oh man, your first conviction was at 14. Tell me about that. And just opening up and sharing in a way that I normally would never do in the context. But we're in the library at an off time, sitting in front of the typewriter, and no one's around. I mean, there was a person I knew who had a dollar bill tattooed on his neck. And I said, oh, wow, we're just talking about getting him out of prison, getting him home. And he said, yeah, my nickname was Dollar Bill because when I was a little kid, I was really fast at counting dollar bills for my mom, who was a big drug dealer. And you're just, and for me, growing up in a privileged situation, just learning about people like that and what they're exposed to, it was an incredible experience for me. And then to be able to see people go home and be part of that, being a helpful.
You were doing time and getting an education on criminal justice.
Yeah, absolutely.
From the other incarcerated people. So let's talk about coming out. You're both lawyers, and then you come back to the world. How does the world accept it? And give us what year, Michele, did you come out, and what?
Oh, let's see. 1985.
And what was your mental, physical situation?
I was disbarred because I had a felony conviction, and I had won the first case and lost a smaller case, or a plea bargain to the smaller case. And so I was disbarred, and I felt like I was overqualified for any job that would have me, and underqualified for most skilled jobs, and I couldn't do legal work. I was unhoused.
Could you work in a law office and be a legal? Do legal research?
You probably could have, or I would have thought to. And at one point, once I got clean, I was able to get a job at a drug treatment program and work in the law office. But then I was advised to not work in the law office because if I wanted to get my license back, I had to be showing that I was doing non-legal work as opposed to legal work.
Why?
Because they don't want people who are disbarred lawyers practicing law under the table. So they want to make sure that there's a distinction between what you're doing than what you would be doing if you were a licensed attorney. It's actually worse than just never having gotten a license when you're disbarred.
It would seem that the logical thing is that you would be keeping up on legal work. Well, why look for clarity? So what is the process that you had to undertake to get, because you are a practicing lawyer now?
Right.
How long did that take, and what did you have to do?
Right. So
besides not work in a law office.
Right. So luckily because I was a recovering addict by the time I put in my application for reinstatement, I had gotten a job in a drug treatment program and did all sorts of work for them. So I had a record of some level of accomplishment, and then a lot of community service and the like that I kept a record of, and so I built up references and a record of sober living, as you might say. And after 7 years, you're allowed to reapply.
7. And who do you go to? Is it all on paper, or do you appear?
No, you actually have a hearing before committee members who then make a recommendation, and then the appellate division has to reinstate you. Now, this is a long time ago, so I might not have it exactly right, but that's basically.
But your experience is real, so
right.
You send forms to the state.
It was way more than just like forms. Like, it wasn't like doing a motion like what Jeff was doing to get people out, where it was automatic once you set forth the 5 factors. This was really more like you're going on trial to see whether you are fit to be an attorney.
But at the start, is it a form that you have to fill out?
Actually, it costs a lot of money to get reinstated, so that people. There may be some people who do it pro se, but most people who I have known who've gotten their licenses back were represented by a specialist who deals with attorney discipline. And in my case, I was very lucky because I was speaking at a panel at the Bar Association and talking about my story when I was disbarred. And one of the attorneys that was there came up to me and said he wanted to represent me pro bono. So that's the only reason.
So
I
the
was
cost
able to-
is not, the cost is not by the Bar Association, but the legal help that you need in
it's
processing.
I think it's very
But
expensive.
the first step was, are you given a form to fill out to start the appeal?
No.
What is the first step?
I'm actually don't recall particularly. I think he put in an application for reinstatement would probably have been how it started.
And then do they send you forms, or do you start with an interview? And who interviews you?
It's really a much more formal process than that. It's really that they're putting in an application for reinstatement, and you get scheduled for hearings, and it's as formal as a criminal case. It's
And
not.
who's when you have a hearing? Who's hearing you?
There's a committee of attorneys that does the hearing. I feel like there was an ALJ that was doing the last one I was a witness at, an administrative law judge. But Jeff is squinting over there, so he might know better.
The Bar Association will have a committee that
Right.
deals specifically with reinstatement. So every state has its own bar association, so the rules will change by state.
But what's different from your situation? You were in Washington, D.C., Michele was in New York City. Who did you go before?
Well, I haven't applied yet. So
You
I came home in 2019.
Where would you apply? You're living now in D.C.
Yeah, I will say that I have not been focused. I have not been laser focused on that process yet. What I'm trying to do is what Michele just said that she spent years doing, which was, gathering references.
Maybe you can hire her to be your legal counsel to re-apply.
Well, there were better.
Because
There are people who are
I want to make a
experts on this.
shitting.
there is some standard out there that sounds there's probably a lot of legal jargon words, but I think ultimately what it all boils down to is one word, which is trust. And you have to just show that you are trustworthy, and the bar wants to see that. And so I think that trust is something, just like, I'm rebuilding trust relationships with my spouse, with my friends, with
How
my
long
family.
have you been home?
6 years.
Do you want to be a lawyer again?
I hope to apply one day, yes. I hope to apply one day. But I think that I think time, is helpful, long-term, trust.
And would you
show
apply
trust.
in D.C. because that's where you were living, or would you come to do you want to be in New York State?
Yeah, I think.
How does it work? And if you get it in one state, is it good in all the other states?
Sort of. I was a member of the D.C. bar and the Maryland bar, and then you get automatically disbarred when you have a felony. So that I would probably think about going back to the places where I was already a member of the bar. If you were going to go to New York and I had never been a member, what I think happens is you actually got to take the bar exam in New York, and then once you pass that, you go in before your review committee, and then you have to
an ethics committee.
Yeah, ethics committee, and then you would go through that process. It wouldn't be reinstatement; it would be, just in the first instance, trying to be let in.
And that would be a crazy gamble for him, because he's better off just going and getting reinstated. Because if DC's not going to take him, New York might not take him, and then he's already spent all that time and effort taking the bar again. So basically, you go back, I think, to where you were admitted, and then he may not be able to appear in court in New York, but the kind of work that I do, you don't have to appear in court anyway. So it's basically you have much more freedom to practice here in an in-house setting.
From what you said, so then the next stage, you both work at the Fortune Society. Do you give legal? I'm trying to find out what your legal background does in the job. Michele, what do you do while you're at the Fortune Society?
So I'm the chief legal officer, and I am in charge of everything from contracts to handling the litigate.
Contracts of what?
Well, we have, I think, 129, 130 contracts at any time where we're contracts with the city, state, federal.
A nonprofit organization having contracts on services.
So we have a whole team of people who review contracts. We have a lot of employee relations matters where people might be concerned about discrimination or investigation, so we deal with that.
But you don't handle criminal cases.
No.
If somebody comes to Fortune and says, I have a case pending,
We would give them the number to legal aid or...
right, you refer, but you don't
Right.
take on cases
Right,
like that.
exactly.
And Jeffrey, what
So
what is your title?
So I was hired to work in the compliance function, and I got promoted in August to be the chief compliance officer. at
Now, is
Fortune
that a
Society.
legal? Explain what compliance.
Yeah, it's not a legal position, and I think compliance probably means different things to different people. We have auditors here that go ahead and review files and make sure that we're in compliance with the rules that have to, that you have to follow.
For instance,
For example, like if you have the Office of Housing says you need to go and you have a certain type of intake form, when you're welcoming somebody into the thing, and you've got to maintain that intake form within the person's file as part of the contract. That
you mean
get
because Fortune has residents,
yeah.
and that each building where there's a residence there's a compliance.
Right. So if Mock J says,
Who?
If the Office of Criminal Justice, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice,
Mock J?
Mock J.
See, I don't know all the initials.
Oh yeah. So if they give us a contract, there's a lot of you have to do A, B, and C. Okay. So we're promising to do A, B, and C. And then we have a whole compliance function that monitors to make sure we're doing A, B, and C. Because if we're saying that we're doing A, B, and C and required under the contract from the city to do A, B, and C, we better be doing A, B, and C.
So a lawyer, it behooves Fortune to have a lawyer, whether they're, well, not a lawyer, but somebody who had legal background to do it. Could a non-lawyer do what you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, mine is
Except
not
he's a genius. He's like a genius. You have no idea
He's a
how
what?
smart. He's a genius.
Well,
No.
but if you're not here and you decided to run for president and Fortune had to hire somebody else, could a person who had no law background do what you're doing?
Absolutely. In fact, the person I took over for did not have a legal background. The former chief compliance officer was also a non-lawyer.
But are there legal aspects of it that have to be determined?
Well, legal. When you say legal,
Do you have to call Michele and say, what is the interpretation?
Absolutely. I call Michele all this. If it even encroaches on any kind of legal question, I call Michele because I need to get her sign off and her advice, her legal advice on things. But let me just give you a per example. You know what I'm doing this morning before our thing was the governor passed a new
Governor
of New York.
Yes.
Governor Hutchell passed the state legislature passed a law that says that all city contractors have to have a gender-based violence policy.
What does that mean?
It just means a policy that you're not going to discriminate against people who've been victims of gender-based violence. Okay, so
You mean people are discriminated against because they've been violently?
yeah.
I don't understand. The victim becomes.
Yeah. So we can't treat someone differently because they were the victim of gender-based violence.
Does that happen?
Well, New York State decided to pass a law about that, and they said that if you're a contractor, which we are, we have to have a policy, and they put a policy, a kind of a model policy up on their website. So my job as the compliance person is I'm going to take that, put what that they put on their website, make sure that it fits what we're doing at Fortune, and then we have to put it up in a certain place and put it up on our website, and then certify that we have a gender-based violence policy and that we are following.
I want to ask. We'll come back to both of you and your law things, but I want to know about this law, and from a female perspective, Michele. Are women denied job opportunities because they were victimized?
Well, I think a lot of what happens with these policies where they say don't discriminate, they basically put some affirmative action requirement on an employer. Like, for instance, there's a lot of, I'm not sure how much this law is different from a lot of some of the laws that are in place now to protect victims of domestic violence. But many women or other victims of domestic violence have lost jobs because they have to go to court to get an order of protection where they're supposed to be at work, and the employer won't let them get off from work to be able to go to court to protect themselves, or they have to move into a domestic violence shelter and they need time.
So it's
off.
not the fact that they were victim; it's their absenteeism, which is why they.
Well, I don't think we want to call it absenteeism under the law. So that's
Yes,
the
that's-
whole
that's- all right,
point.
that's it.
Yeah. So
Okay.
Yeah.
so other things I think would be like if their abuser shows up at the workplace, people have been fired because of that.
They don't want to deal with the.
Exactly, so you can't do that. So things like that, although I haven't read this particular law in any depth, but that sort of thing. I would like to say, just shifting a little bit, like one of the things that Jeff did a fantastic job on is that he basically wrote our entire personnel handbook, which is like 120 pages of material that guides everything that human resources does and that serves as a reference book for employees. And so it does require a lot of legal knowledge, just like working in HR does. Like you know that, you know, what kind of sick leave people are entitled to, which is based in the law similar to the domestic violence policy. So you know what kind of investigations people have a right to in a workplace, and just a myriad of things that people need to know as employees. So it was a book.
So when
that he wrote
a
for us.
nonprofit organization like Fortune Society, when they establish policy, they need to talk to you too, because they have to make sure that they cover all the legal ramifications.
Yeah, and they sometimes look to us for common sense too, because we've been around a while, and we kind of, you know, people look to us for just the wisdom you get from being in and around this area for a long time, and so we try to also just, you know, give common sense advice as well.
Have you met other people come to Fortune that had been lawyers or want to be? You know, one of the first people that ever came to Fortune, this is in the very early days, Walter Strauss, who I met in prison, said he wanted to go to college, fine, go to college. And he said, I want to go to law school. This is 1972 or 3. And I said, I don't think you could become a lawyer because you have to go through the ethics committee. And he said, let's deal with that when it happens. And as it turned out, the chair of the ethics committee was on the Fortune Society board, Ellen Buttonwieser, and he passed. And 10 years later, he called me and said, come to court. He became a judge, the first formerly incarcerated person to be a judge. Do we get people here that want to be lawyers who have felony convictions that come for counsel? Have you met any?
I mean, I've certainly, sometimes employees will be in that situation too, because, you know, more than half of our employees have been previously incarcerated. So I have definitely heard from some of them about wanting to become lawyers.
Do they go to law? They have to go to law school.
You know, I'm not necessarily that enthusiastic. The same way you responded to Walter Strauss, I think his name is the same way I tend to respond to people as well. You know, that. You know, I do know of cases where people have graduated from law school and then it took years to get admitted, so that people have to understand that they're choosing a profession where it's going to be a little bit more difficult to use your degree. And
so it's still difficult if you,
yeah, I think it's
if you have a
difficult.
felony conviction to become a lawyer.
I mean, I know people who have done it and have gotten past the ethics committee, and I would imagine it's a little bit easier now than it was, you know, some years ago.
I always said the logical answer to that, certainly, and with people running for office, is, well, you got your prison out of the way before you became a lawyer, went to prison.
Right.
Most of them do it after they get arrested. So before we lose both of you, you're an author also, Michele, and we have to share. You write ferocious crime-related books.
Yes.
Under what name?
Well, I write under Michele W. Miller mostly, but I've also written one book under the name Michele Weinstat Miller. But you could see everything at michelewmiller.com, but I've written a couple of crime thrillers, Widows-in-Law, Gone by Morning, and a zombie book, The 13-Step Zombie Recovery, which is, if you've ever been involved with recovery communities, you might find it funny. And then my latest book is called The Lower Power, which scared you.
Scared me to death. Does your as a writer of fiction, does your legal background play a role?
Well, I do tend to have lawyers, and I always tend to have these jail and prison scenes in my books. I don't do it intentionally, but I guess there's a lot of trauma that has to be worked out. So I end up finding, I don't think that there's been a single book that I've written where there wasn't some kind of scene where somebody was in jail, and usually unjustly in jail for something. So I seem to need to work through that.
Which prompts a final question, and that is, I saw a screening the other night of a devastating movie called 16 Years, the story of Jeff Deskovic, a man who did 16 years, and the DNA proved him to be innocent. What is the state? At the end of it, they showed that there are 2,600 people who have been released with new evidence that were not guilty. Do you have an assessment from the number of people that have been incarcerated? Is the criminal justice system failing, and that a number of people, the numbers are high of people who do time that shouldn't be?
I mean, I think it's always been the case that justice is unequal, that, I'm fairly clear that if I hadn't had some amount of privilege...
race and color?
Race,
class,
and
class,
yeah,
and money,
and the fact that I was already an attorney at the time, I'm pretty clear that I probably would have done 15 to life.
If you were black.
I mean,
or
they
poor.
didn't have a search warrant when they searched my place. The evidence was suppressed. Would somebody else get the kind of representation that I had? My attorney was a former law partner of the judge. And I'm talking New York City. I'm not talking about some backwater place where everybody knows everybody. It was in New York City. And so, I think that I did get a lot more sympathy and a lot higher level of legal work. And I think a lot of people, I pled to my last case. It was really, I think, an unwise plea bargain. I should have probably not done that, and frankly, it was after my lawyer quit. And I was like, okay, I don't know who this knucklehead is that they've appointed for me. I better plea. And I think that that's probably what happens to everybody.
Well, did either of you play a role in your own case as lawyers? Or
I was the client.
You had lawyers, but did you have a lot to say to your lawyers?
Oh, yeah, right. I
mean, more so than the average person would.
I would think so.
I mean, if I got busted, I think I'd be at the mercy of the lawyer's decisions because I wouldn't know where to begin.
Well, honestly, when you're the person who's the target, it's very hard to think clearly. I have to say that I could not understand how that police officer threw me out of the way of the door after I told him he couldn't come in because he didn't have a warrant. So I never understood that, and I thought there must be something that I'm not getting. So that's the kind of way the thinking
But you weren't
goes.
Thinking as a lawyer. You were thinking as a
person who's going through it's actually as a person who's going through a trauma and who's just about to lose their entire life, and it's very hard to be like sort of, detached and objective about your own case, at least at the beginning. I suppose after some time, I don't know, Jeff, did you...
No, I felt the same way. I was a complete hot mess.
Were you an observer rather than a participant in your legal situation?
I was in an altered state of mind, and I was unable to contribute to my own situation.
Before we leave, Jeffrey, would you agree with Michele, or do you have a different perspective? If somebody came to you that had, through fortune, or who had done time, and they wanted to become a lawyer?
Well, it takes a leap of faith to do that. If someone who has never been a lawyer comes to me and says, this is what I want to do, I know of 3 or 4 people who have successfully done that. But you are taking a risk because you have to go and enroll in law school for 3 years and pay tuition. And maybe you get a break on tuition or maybe you don't. Then you have to study for the bar exam and you have to pay to take the bar exam, and that's another several $1,000s. And then you have, at that point, you put yourself up in front of an ethics committee and
several $1,000s to take the bar exam.
Yeah.
Are there any poor people that become lawyers then?
So, a bar
loans.
Yeah, a bar review course costs thousands of dollars, and if you can pass the bar without taking a review course, then God bless you.
So then class and race becomes a factor in who becomes lawyers too, doesn't it?
Oh, it does, but I think a lot of people, what it does also does is that some people come out with a lot of student loans, and some people don't.
You pay for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Right, and if you don't get your license because you have to get up the steep hill to get your license, then you're in debt and you don't have a way to earn a living. And besides from anything else, what a lot of people don't realize is that unless you come from a really good law school with really good grades, you're probably going to make less money coming out as a first-year lawyer than you did before you went to law school. It is not as high-paying a profession.
Well, and you go to legal. We hear that from legal aid people all the
Exactly.
time, and they probably have a high percentage of law school graduates.
When I got reinstated, I went to work for the Administration for Children's Services as a frontline attorney. And, most people could not afford to live in an apartment on their own on the kind of salaries we got. So, I did get a taste of that.
Well, you're both very enlightening, but I'm slightly depressing.
Well, here,
We're so happy.
This is the thing. I mean, one of the reasons why I'm not really laser focused right now on getting my license back is because I work at Fortune doing meaningful work that's challenging, that's non-legal work, but that makes a difference. And even if I got my license back, I wouldn't want to leave Fortune. I wouldn't want to change my job. Maybe I could do some more legal stuff for Michele, but I would just stay where I am right now, making a difference and trying to help people. And you asked the thing about being incarcerated, the thing about going through the prison justice system is that, yeah, it's terrible to be incarcerated, but the harder part is coming back. The harder part is getting ethics boards to give you a license, and not just to be a lawyer, but to have any licensed profession. It's hard to get an apartment when now everybody does background checks. That's a universal thing. It's just very, very difficult. And I know where I came from. I had the support of my family, and I had some savings in the bank that I could rely on. People who don't have that kind of support which is most people. And they face those barriers.
50% of the people coming home are homeless.
Yeah.
Right, and I came home homeless. I didn't have any place, and I, though I had family, my family were civil servants. They didn't have a lot of money, so I came home to a lot of the challenges that Jeff is talking about. But I would say that I'm gloriously happy at Fortune after I've been
that's what we want a
law.
happy note to end.
Yes, can I just say, because I practiced law. I've practiced law for 30 years since I got my license back. I'm like old as dirt. I have to say, I'm dating myself. But and when I got to Fortune, it was the first time I was really like, oh, this is why I went to law school, because it's such a satisfying kind of work, and the people are so amazing here, and like the love is palpable here, and you just don't get that anywhere. And my husband, when I come home, and my kids, they see finally that I have a life that's really worth living, and because of the experience that Jeff and I have gone through, we're able to help in a way that other people might not be able to. And I think of ourselves and myself as helping to save lives. I don't think of it as just being a job. I think we save lives every day in a literal sense. And so I'm like pleased that I got my license back so I could play a part in what Fortune's doing.
Yeah, we're the support that everybody needs, and if they don't have it from their family or friends, they can come to Fortune. We can be their family and
You've
friends.
both given me the conclusion I was seeking, because I now I'm no longer depressed. I'm hopeful by what you got. Jeffrey Wertkin, Michele Weinstat, thank you for sharing. Enlightening and not depressing at this moment.
Give me one more chance to try and make it right. Give me one more go. Let me see the light.
Thanks very much for joining this podcast. I'm your host, David Rothenberg. If you need more information, or if you'd like more information about the Fortune Society, check out our website. It's quite simply fortunesociety.org. A lot of information on it, as well as all of our podcasts.
Give me one more poem. Let me speak straight from my heart. I wanna go home.